When a child moves alone into an apartment complex, it will be his innocence that teaches his neighbors what it means to be an adult. Prepare the kindergarten bag, your wooden sword, and your lease agreement as we delve into the world of Kotaro Lives Alone. A 4-year-old boy, Kotaro, moves into the Shimizu apartments completely alone and without the accompaniment of an adult. His first action in this new place is to go buy tissues at the supermarket, but he rejects the children's tissues offered by the saleswoman and heads straight for the big boxes of tissues. As he makes his way to the cash register to pay for his purchases, he momentarily sets aside his serious demeanor as he is amazed by a toy sword for sale in the store and decides to buy it. Back in his new apartment, he convinces himself that he will now be able to defend himself when his enemies come looking for him. Once in his new apartment, Kotaro is interrupted by the screams from the room next door. Once the commotion passes, our protagonist introduces himself to his noisy neighbor to make friends, and as a welcome gift, he offers a pack of tissues, which Shinkarino accepts. However, the young man is surprised to learn that a child is living alone and renting the apartment next door on his own. Nevertheless, he doesn't dwell on the matter, and Shinkarino continues with his things when his new neighbor knocks on his door again, as he can't find a bathtub in his apartment. Then, Shin guides him to the bathhouse so he can go alone. However, moments later, he sees on the television the concerning increase in child kidnappings in the city and, driven by an act of kindness and care for his little neighbor, decides to accompany him to the bathhouse. Once there, despite our protagonist's serious attitude and his attempt to behave like an adult, Kotaro again proves to be a child when he asks Shin for help because his eyes were full of foam. Shin, beyond helping him clean his eyes, begins to wash the little boy's hair and is surprised when Kotaro reveals that it has been a long time since anyone helped him wash his hair. On the way back, Shin tries to start a conversation with Kotaro, but his social skills are not good. Despite this, he manages to superficially learn about our protagonist's situation. He lives alone, without parents, and money is not a problem for him. Also, after exchanging a few words, Kotaro reveals that his peculiar way of speaking comes from a television show called Tanasaman. The next day, Kotaro and Shin agree to have dinner at the adult's house that same night, and when Kotaro begins to go about his life, Shin, taking the position of tutor and caretaker of the child, follows him to prevent anything bad from happening to him. On the way to the supermarket, they meet the attractive neighbor Mizuki, whom Shin did not know until then, but who already had a good relationship with Kotaro after his presentation with the tissues. That night, Kotaro uses Shin's TV to watch his favorite series Tanasaman. The next day, they find Mizuki at the door of her house, who seems to have fainted from alcohol and with swollen eyes after crying. Kotaro then runs to the supermarket, followed by Shin, in search of a cold compress for his neighbor. The fact that he understood the girl's crying and his skill in applying cold compresses only makes Shin worry more about Kotaro. Later, we see that Shin meets with his boss, who receives the drawings of his manga. While this happens, Kotaro falls to the ground and hits his knees hard, as it should be, and despite the fear and pain, the boy disinfects and bandages himself, then goes to Shin's apartment waiting for a congratulation from him for having behaved like an adult. After congratulating him, Shin draws a Tanasaman on the bandages on his knees, which amazes Kotaro in a way never seen before, as for the first time in all this time we see him smile. At that moment, another neighbor, Isamu Tamaru, approaches Kotaro to play with him, but he has a very clingy attitude with the child, which Kotaro seems not to like as he is not used to physical contact. Isamu gives Kotaro a Tanasaman doll that Kotaro rejects, knowing that at first, it was for his son. Again, Kotaro uses Shin's TV to watch Tanasaman until late at night. The adult is concerned about our protagonist's obsession with this program because it's really bad and not very popular among the population, according to Shin's searches. However, he dismisses it because, after all, Kotaro is a strange child in general terms, and it wouldn't be so odd that he doesn't have the tastes of a common child. Nevertheless, the next day, at the bathhouse, Kotaro admits that it's not a good cartoon, not even the plot, but it's still very special to him. After a situation with another child his age, Shin manages to understand that our protagonist's obsession is related to his past, as apparently his parents did not take good care of him, so the child spent hours watching the program to feel accompanied. However, Kotaro admits that he no longer needs the show for company because now he is an exemplary adult. Despite this, when he finds out that the final episode of Tanasaman is being aired, Kotaro becomes very sad. This causes Isamu to appear at Shin's door, worried, as they must accompany Kotaro on the day of the last broadcast of his favorite program. For his part, Kotaro sits on the curb near his apartment next to a sign that says "Show for 10 yen." Many people stop to watch his show, in which Kotaro plays Tanasaman with his sword that always accompanies him, and to those who celebrate the show, our protagonist gives them the 10 yen, contrary to what one would think. In a flashback, we can see that this is because the joy of others watching his show reminds him of his mother's smile when he showed her his new Tanasaman moves. That same night, Shin and Isamu appear at Kotaro's apartment to accompany him to watch the last episode of his series, and Kotaro seems to enjoy their company. The next day, as every day, Shin and Kotaro head to the bathhouse. However, when they arrive, they find that it will be closed for a few days. This greatly worries Kotaro, who in the following days begins to act in a strange way and increasingly distances himself from other people, to the point of sending his neighbor to shop to avoid contact with the supermarket cashier. Kotaro explains that he doesn't feel comfortable after not bathing for 2 days, to which Shin confronts him saying that it doesn't make sense to do what he's doing for just 2 days without bathing. Mizuki, who observes the whole scene, explains to Shin that surely, in the past, our protagonist had bad experiences due to a similar situation. Kotaro uses his last resort and decides to bathe in the kitchen sink, now more relaxed because being clean he is certain that his neighbor will not hate him. Another day, Kotaro leaves his house alone, and when Shin asks him where he is going, the child responds evasively and runs away. We then see that our protagonist is at the preschool class start ceremony, and he enrolls alone, trying to convince himself that everything will be fine, even though he is alone in a place surrounded by children accompanied by their parents. When his neighbors begin to put the pieces together, they realize that it is the start of classes and rush to accompany Kotaro in his class ceremony. In school, Wednesdays are Bento Wednesdays. Kotaro buys the bentos at the supermarket, but upon seeing that all the children bring bentos cooked by their mothers and with fun shapes, he begins to feel somewhat lonely. Then, after buying the bento at the supermarket, he asks different customers to help him assemble his bento in a fun way. Once finished, Kotaro is very happy with the result, as it is a special bento for him. Kotaro finds a man giving away balloons in front of a store, 1 balloon per person. Then, disguised as different people, he appears 4 times in front of the man to ask for a balloon each time. The man, despite realizing that it is clearly the same child disguised, feels compassion for him and each time gives him a different balloon. In the apartment complex, Kotaro asks Shin to draw a face on each balloon, one of a boy, one of a girl, one of a man, and one of a woman, to which Shin agrees. Later, the man giving away balloons finds Kotaro in the park playing alone, but with the balloons tied to his clothes. We then see that each of the balloons had a word on the back: brother, sister, dad, and mom. The next day, Shin looks for Kotaro at the end of school. On the way, he receives a call from his editor, which Kotaro overhears. Shin then tells him that he will have to meet with the editor later and that sometimes the words towards him can be very harsh. So, our protagonist decides to accompany him. At the meeting, in the face of the editor's criticism, Kotaro jumps to defend his neighbor, and when Shin leaves to go to the bathroom for a moment, the child asks the editor not to be so hard on his neighbor because he tries very hard. The editor then tells him that Shin is very good at what he does and that the criticisms are constructive because he knows he can be even better. This reassures Kotaro. On the train, Kotaro tells Shin that from now on he will accompany him to all his meetings with the editor, hoping to give back a little of everything Shin does for him, and he proclaims himself his tutor, even though Shin says he is too old to have a tutor. Later, Kotaro asks Sir Tamaru to accompany him to buy clothes because he considers him a man who knows about fashion, to which Isamu responds yes. Once he is wearing his new clothes, Kotaro is very happy because he confesses that he wants to please everyone. At night, Mizuki finds that Kotaro has appeared at her job as a night companion, who seems to attract attention at the place due to his cuteness and his sword show. However, Mizuki calls Shin so that he can come to pick him up from the club, and Shin does so. The next night he returns to the club, and he explains to Mizuki that he shows up there because he wants to spend more time with her and have her company. The young woman, touched by the confession, agrees to spend that night in his company and also with Shin, who appears at that moment to pick up his little neighbor again. Another day, Mizuki, Shin, and Kotaro go for a picnic in the park, and Kotaro flatly refuses to appear in photographs due to his past life. Shin, observing this situation, unsheathes his drawing skills and sketches on a sheet a laughing Mizuki next to Kotaro, in which Kotaro's face can be seen. It's a beautiful scene, which makes our protagonist very happy when he receives the drawing that his neighbor gives him. On the other hand, lawyer Kobayashi is tasked with being the new person to deliver money to Kotaro weekly. However, it's a difficult job because she must pretend that the money is a gift from very kind people to Kotaro, because the truth would destroy him, knowing that the money he receives is part of his mother's life insurance, who has passed away. The instructions for delivering the money are precise because Kotaro always receives festively whoever comes to deliver the money. Touched by the situation, the lawyer commits to carrying out the weekly task perfectly. Kotaro visits the house of his friend Kakeru, where he observes a life completely opposite to his own, and beyond finding it strange, he worries for his friend. Kakeru, whose parents are working all day, spends almost all his time with his housekeeper, asking her for help with absolutely everything, preparing snacks, cleaning the house, but also with minor things like when he spills juice on himself. He even tells Kotaro not to worry about being tidy since the housekeeper will take care of it. Seeing this, Kotaro is concerned, and the next day he takes his friend to fish for mud crabs, making their own fishing rods with sticks and thread. When Kakeru proves to be not good at it and calls for his parents, Kotaro interrupts him, saying that children are weak, so they must learn to do things by themselves, so they don't depend on anyone in case their close adults disappear. Kakeru then listens to his friend and they continue fishing. With the lute in hand, they decide to cook crab soup, and Kakeru offers to cook crab soup for Kotaro when he feels lonely, which makes our protagonist's eyes shine. At another time, when Shin looks for Kotaro at school, he notices that he is injured, and finds out that he is not too good at playing dodgeball, so he tries to help him train. However, Kotaro, due to situations related to his past and with a mother who ignored him, feels that he cannot ignore the ball hits from his friends, so he catches them with his face. Shin then explains the way to play and that he will be able to get along better with the kids in his class if he plays correctly. With this in mind, Kotaro starts to play dodgeball well. Kotaro's neighbors find out that it was his birthday, thanks to the crown given to him at kindergarten. So, they decide to celebrate his birthday party the next day. Kotaro, excited because he had never considered that being born was important, begins to prepare to celebrate his birthday, improving his lung capacity to blow out the candles. When indeed our protagonist and his neighbors celebrate the birthday, Kotaro runs away with the cake to also celebrate the birthday of his street cat friends. The next day, Kakeru asks Kotaro to run away from home with him. Kotaro agrees, and they spend the day together, eating lots of sweets. Kakeru expresses to his friend the envy he has of his life because he has no limits with money and can do whatever he wants. Kakeru explains to our protagonist that the reason for running away from home is to worry the parents so they realize that he is special, but when he arrives at Kotaro's house and sees that he lives alone and without parents, Kakeru decides to return to his house. Kotaro is sad because no one worries about him, but at that moment Shin appears totally angry and worried about Kotaro's disappearance, endearing the child who finally sees that he is important to someone. Kobayashi continues visiting and perfectly fulfilling her role when she must bring the weekly money to Kotaro. But Kotaro offers Shin's beer to the lawyer, and she ends up getting drunk at the child's house and falling asleep. Despite the negative view that the mothers and fathers of the kindergarten have of Shin as they see him as a tired and careless young man, the young man surprises them when he volunteers to carry out the school fair, an activity that everyone wants to avoid being in charge of. The teacher then thinks it would be very nice if Shin were Kotaro's father because it is noticeable that he wants his happiness. Shin accompanies Kotaro on his weekly purchase of disposable tissues and is surprised to observe that the child spends too much time talking to the clerk about tissues, in addition to always taking the most expensive ones. On the way, our protagonist continues talking about the quality and ingredients of the different types of tissues, to end up affirming that because of those ingredients the tissues he buys are sweeter. This surprises Shin, who believes he is actually talking about the scent. However, that same night on the news a man recounts that once he remained locked in his house for so long without food that he resorted to eating tissues, which were very sweet. In the next purchase, Shin convinces Kotaro to take the cheaper tissues, as from now on he would not need to eat tissues again. Kotaro, surprised and happy, agrees with him and ends up taking the more economical ones. Another day, Shin and Mizuki show up at Kotaro's door at dinner time and manage to observe that the child has prepared an exorbitant amount of dishes, all very delicious. Kotaro then offers to invite them to dinner the next night and to prepare the food for them. When his three neighbors are at the table, expectant for the tasty dishes to come, they find that Kotaro has prepared only one dish, very exquisite, but without so much variety. Kotaro, inwardly, feels happy because that night he has not had to prepare so many dishes to keep himself company since he now has real company. Kotaro meets with an old friend from the orphanage, Sir Ryota, with whom they had promised a long time ago to meet in a special place on the day of the Perseid meteor shower. In the conversation, Kotaro apologizes for having run away without saying goodbye the last time, but Ryota understands the situation since his father had become violent that day and tells him not to worry. In turn, he apologizes for having run away with his digital camera as he wanted to keep it. Ryota understands that what Kotaro really wanted were the memories and not the camera, so he gives him the memory card that contains all the photos of them together. Another day, Kotaro meets with Sir Fukuno, the editor of Shin's manga, to deliver the draft, as Shin is sick at the moment. When Kotaro learns that Fukuno has children, he tells him to go back home as they will feel lonely without him. However, at that moment, Fukuno notices the Tenosaman sword that our protagonist has on his waist and invites him to take a walk through his workplace, where there is a lot of merchandise and games about Tenosaman. Kotaro accepts but continuously feels uncomfortable because staying in that place means Fukuno does not return to his children. However, the following week, when he runs into him in front of Shin's apartment, he tells him that he could continue to visit the editorial office as long as it was a weekday. At the supermarket, Kotaro talks to one of the employees and she tells him that children arise from the love of parents. Kotaro then hopes to do a good job and be a treasure for his parents, wherever they are. A new resident, Sir Aota, introduces himself at the apartments and begins to get close to Kotaro, asking him to be friends. Our protagonist becomes close to this new man, so he begins to engage in activities with him that he previously did with Shin, such as going to the bathhouse and being accompanied to kindergarten. After a few days together, Kotaro starts to notice that they have too many things in common, such as their favorite sweets or their love for Tenosaman. However, in the middle of a rain, when Aota proposes a game with the sound of rain and kitchen utensils, our protagonist begins to suspect. Aota starts investigating Kotaro by asking questions to his neighbors, and both Shin and Isamu begin to suspect. Because of this, they show up at Aota's apartment to see what's happening, and with a small bribe and without much resistance from the new tenant, he begins to tell the whole truth. Kotaro's father had specifically hired him to find his son, and Aota discovered that Kotaro had moved to that place hoping his father would not find him, in addition to having issued a restraining order against his father. When Isamu asks if he would convey this information to Kotaro's father, Aota affirms, saying that's what he's paid for, and that Kotaro is protected by the law. This enrages Isamu, who threatens him, but just at that moment, Kotaro appears looking for his new friend and defending him. However, later and alone, he asks if he will betray him to his father, which surprises Aota. The next day, Kotaro asks Shin to accompany him to kindergarten, as Aota had to leave urgently. This sets off the alarms of his three neighbors, who believe that Aota left early after being discovered and went to share the information with Kotaro's father. So, for days, the three adults dedicate all their time to protect Kotaro in case his father appears. However, Kotaro gets angry and tells them to stop treating him like a weakling, as his reason for moving alone was always to become strong. Aota appears before our four protagonists and tells them that Kotaro is safe because he gave his client a wrong address. Kotaro, on the other hand, expresses to Kakeru that he must become strong and at that moment confesses that he had to flee from his house for being a weakling, since if he had not been weak, his father would not have turned bad. He then believes that when he can be strong, he will be able to live with his father again. Knowing this, Shin proposes to Kotaro to become strong together, which generates a lot of happiness in the little one and allows Sir Kirino to be by the child's side when he realizes that his father is evil and it's not his fault. Later, Kotaro poses a mystery to investigate, for which he asks Sir Aota for help. It turns out that in the end, everything had been a master plan of the child to prepare a surprise party for the private investigator as a celebration of his farewell. And it is that now he considers him his friend, since even though the job for his father has ended a long time ago, Aota continues to be by Kotaro's side. Towards the end, our protagonist gives a magnifying glass to the private investigator. A classmate of Kotaro, Kana, asks the boy to play with him despite not being very close friends and knowing little about each other. In the first meeting, they do nothing but play cards, only at Shin's request, who doesn't know how to make the children have fun together. The next day, Kana's mother asks again for them to play together, and on the way, the girl confesses that it's not very fun to play with Kotaro. Despite this, Kana's mother continuously asks Shin if the children can spend the day together. When Kotaro asks if Kana wouldn't prefer to spend the day with other children, since she seems to have fun with them, the girl confesses that she only meets with Kotaro because her mom asks her as a favor. After hearing this, and after rumors about Kana's family's bankruptcy, Shin confronts Kana's mother to tell her to be more considerate of the children's feelings, as he understands that the woman's goal is to make her daughter see that there are people with a life worse than theirs so she doesn't feel bad. In kindergarten, Kei, a classmate of Kotaro, continually gets sick and asks to go to the infirmary. On the other hand, when Kotaro gets sick, he denies it at all costs, as he doesn't want to appear weak. However, when he asks Kei why he accepts being sick all the time, the boy explains that he would feel more guilty infecting all his friends, so he prefers to heal and then play with them. Kotaro then understands where the boy's words are heading and, thanking him for his lesson, decides to go home, accompanied by Shin, to cure his cold. For this, he buys a giant box of oranges that will provide the necessary vitamin C to heal faster. Kobayashi appears at Kotaro's door on a different day than she usually goes to deliver the weekly money, as she wants to ask him a favor, to accompany her to choose a new apartment. It turns out that the apartment they go to is the old apartment where Kotaro lived with his parents. Despite the possible bad memories, the lawyer read in the weekly entry that Kotaro gives her that he wished to know how his old home is now, so she decides to take him deceived. Kotaro immediately realizes and observes every part of the place, evoking old memories, which we do not know if they are good or bad. Another day, Kotaro finds in the forest 3 siblings looking for fruits to eat as they have no money, one of them older who must take care of his 2 younger siblings. Upon learning of Kotaro's situation, without parents and maintaining himself, the older boy asks Kotaro to take care of his little brothers and leaves. Kotaro, with total innocence, stays with them for a while, but seeing that their brother does not come back to look for them, they head to the city. There, they find the older brother, who explains that sometimes he does not feel like taking care of his siblings, and in the face of our protagonist's reprimand, he explains that he thought Kotaro would understand because they both have the same luck, they were abandoned by their parents. Kotaro flatly denies that his parents abandoned him because he remembers that when his mother left, she told him that if he behaved well, she would return. While having tea, Kotaro learns from the television that a Tanasaman movie will be released. Mizuki, who is there, receives a message from her ex-boyfriend. Later, the woman meets with her neighbors, and Kotaro soon realizes the bruise Mizuki has on her cheek, even though she tries to hide it behind a mask. Then, she tells them she has a toxic ex-boyfriend whom she tried to leave many times but never could, and this last time she tried to leave him, he did not hesitate to hit her. Shin proposes going to the police with her to file a report, as Samu proposes to beat him up, but Kotaro insists that the best decision is for her to move, as her boyfriend already knows where she lives. When she refuses, Kotaro starts to annoy Mizuki to make her leave. When she confronts him to say she can file a police report without needing to leave, Kotaro explains that if she does that, her boyfriend will become bad, just like Kotaro made his father bad. Mizuki tells him that's not how things work, and that he did not make his father weak. However, after filing the report at the police and not receiving a response, she indeed decides to move and says goodbye to her neighbors. Without fully understanding how, Shin ends up taking not only Kotaro but also 3 of his friends to the cinema, who are very excited. Shin, not wanting to disappoint his neighbor, indulges all the whims of the children. However, contrary to what one might think, Kotaro, instead of enjoying the outing, finds himself completely jealous that his tutor is paying more attention to his friends than to him. Amidst laughs over the little one's jealousy, Shin invites him to watch the Tanasaman movie alone, which makes our protagonist very happy. At another time, the son of Isamu, whom his father misses a lot, appears at the apartment complex for a visit. Kotaro hosts him for a few hours, until Isamu appears, who gets angry upon seeing his son there. When Yuta mentions that he looked up his father's address to visit him secretly from his mother, Isamu scolds him, saying that this should not be done and that he should return to his mother at that moment. Despite loving his son and wanting to see him very much, Isamu sets those boundaries and that distance with Yuta because he does not want the child to start breaking the rules from a young age. A new neighbor, Sumire Takei, moves into the apartments, who introduces herself to all her neighbors and makes a good first impression. Despite seeming like a strict and pleasant person, Sumire has a big problem. She gets very uncomfortable and nervous when around children, but she does her best to get along with them. Days later, Kotaro appears to have gained a lot of weight, so Sumire accompanies him to the kindergarten nutrition meeting to find out that all the children give their leftover food to our protagonist, who cannot stop eating when he finds food in front of him due to his complicated past. After the meeting, the children's parents resolve to talk to their children so that it does not happen again. Later, Kotaro invites his neighbors to the exhibition of his treasure house, where he keeps everything important to him. There are Shin's drawings, but also things from his sad past, like the gloves his mother used to dress him because she was disgusted to touch him. At the dentist that Kotaro visits, the children's appointments are much longer than the adults, so his assistant asks the dentist why this is. The man tells her that in his past he didn't pay much attention to the signs children can show of their lives, only to his dental work. Therefore, he once ignored these signs in one of his young patients, who showed signs of having problems with food, and the next day the girl appeared in the news because she died of starvation. From that day on, the dentist interviews each of the children to see if he can help them in difficult situations. Another day, in the apartment complex, Sir Tasuku, an old friend of Kotaro from the orphanage, appears. Our protagonist is very happy to see him and invites him to his house. Tasuku tells him that he spoke with Ryota, who told him about Kotaro's situation, so he wanted to see him. After making him doubt about the reliability of Shin, and knowing that Kotaro receives a weekly allowance, Tasuku asks our protagonist for a favor. Later, Kobayashi appears at Shin's door to express her concern for Kotaro, as the child has been asking for even more money for a few weeks. Then Shin confronts Tasuku, who tells him that indeed, he and our protagonist are thinking of moving in together. It seems that Tasuku was one of the first to accept Kotaro when he arrived at the orphanage, so the child is very fond of him. However, Shin and the lawyer continue to be a bit worried, so Kobayashi decides to investigate the boy. She then discovers that Tasuku has large debts, has taken out loans, and is behind on payments but began to pay them once he started living with Kotaro. When they try to confront Kotaro to tell him the new information, the child firmly defends his friend. However, he has known from the beginning that Tasuku's intentions were never to move in together, but that he was lying to him and stealing his money. Despite this, Kotaro doesn't mind being lied to, as when they were in the orphanage, he said he would always trust Tasuku just for being Tasuku, and he will always trust him. He even began to collect cans to give to his friend because he wanted to give him money that he had earned himself. After this confession, Tasuku felt bad, got a job, and began to return the money to his friend. Kotaro continued collecting cans to build a castle where he and all his new friends could live. Shin's ex-girlfriend, Akane, comes to pick up Kotaro, as now that Shin is doing well in his job, he is busier than ever. As they are about to leave, Kotaro's teacher hands the woman a pamphlet so she doesn't forget the final presentation of the kindergarten course. However, she puts it in her pocket and does not give it to Shin, as the event falls on the same day as the submission of his manga. The girl disapproves of Shin's relationship with Kotaro, believing it takes too much of his work time, at a moment when Shin is particularly tired. Akane tells Kotaro that she will now accompany him everywhere so as not to bother Shin, making our protagonist feel like a burden to his neighbor and accept Akane's deal. Despite this, Shin never stops accompanying his little neighbor. On the day of the event, even though Akane wants to hide it from Shin, he shows up at the kindergarten because he would never forget an important date for Kotaro. When his ex-girlfriend asks him why he does it, Shin answers that he wants to be in all the important moments of the little one to create beautiful memories. Finally, Akane apologizes and convinces Kotaro that he is the best thing that could happen to Shin because he motivates him to improve his manga, which is true. Later we see why Kotaro always wears the same shirt, and it's because it's a special shirt that he created himself with a designer who was his neighbor when he lived elsewhere, and who also took care of him for a long time when his parents neglected him. Touched by the child's story, the designer gave Kotaro a huge batch of shirts with the same design so that he always has clothes. Kotaro asks Shin for help to go to Konomi Station, and Shin sets out to accompany him as he does not want him to go anywhere alone, and he does not remember very well where it is. After buying a bouquet of flowers, both characters head to the cemetery as Kotaro wants to ask at his ancestor's family grave to talk to his grandparents. When they begin to clean the grave, Shin observes that the name of Kotaro's mother is written on the tomb, understanding that despite what the child thinks, she has already passed away. Then he tries at all costs to prevent the child from reading that, and when Kotaro asks him if he will see his mom again, Shin, contrary to the promise of never lying to him, ends up deceiving the child by telling him that he will see her someday. Shin makes his little neighbor promise that every time he goes to visit the cemetery, he talks to him so they go together, as his goal is to avoid at all costs that Kotaro reads his mother's name on the tomb. Thus ends the first season of this curious series. We hope that the people of that platform confirm a second season and do not cancel it as they do with all the series I like. If you like this series and want to recommend me a similar series, or if you just want a greeting, let me know in the comments. For my part, I say goodbye, until next time.